Good evening, and I'd like to call to order this committee of the whole meeting for the town of Saugeen Shores and extend a welcome to everyone in the chambers this evening. Our first order of business is a declaration of pecuniary interest, and I'll remind every member of your responsibility. You can do so now or when it arises on the agenda. We have nothing. We have no additions, deletions, or amendments to the agenda. This evening we have 3 delegations, and the first is Mr. Dave Bradley, and he has Jan... Dave can introduce him. Chamberlain, sorry. Thanks. They're here to talk about Council on Aging in Grey Bruce. So welcome, Dave. And if you just come to the mic and there's a blue button, push it and welcome, Jan.
We're good. Mayor Smith, Deputy Mayor Charbonneau, I'll call you Norm before the night's over, I'm sure, Vice Deputy Huber, councillors and staff, and ladies and gentlemen. The first thing I must apologize for is my sidekick, Wally Halliday, who's down with some virus of some description, so I've enlisted Jan Chamberlain, our vice chair, to carry his part of the day. The Council on Aging, it all started with a senior summit back in March of 2014. This summit was held at the Bayshore in Owen Sound, and the express task of that summit was to gauge the interest of older adults in Grey and Bruce and whether they wanted to initiate their own Council on Aging. And so through that summit, over and over, we heard from attendees that it's about time. So we set up a steering committee and worked very hard through the January, February, March of 2015, and we actually held our first council meeting on March 30th, 2015, with 17 members present. That's an important number to remember. So what does a COA, a Council on Aging, do for seniors? First of all, it brings representatives of older adults from right across Grey and Bruce counties together and gives them a platform to make their collective voice heard. The goal is to ferret out the real concerns and issues of older adults along with their proposed solutions, so these concerns can be embedded in the age-friendly community plans for Grey and Bruce. The process is for the counties and municipalities to look at their strategic planning efforts and look at them through an age-friendly lens to see where and how these age-friendly concepts can be integrated. The last item is about the amount of educational programs that are available right now to our older adults. The problem is they don't know about them. So we need to get some education going in their direction. Our current strategy is to facilitate. Is to facilitate the setup of senior advisory committees in each of the 17 municipalities. And once that has happened, these advisory committees will send one member each to sit on the Council on Aging, and that will give total representation for every municipality in Grey and Bruce. So where are we right now? Grey Highlands has their advisory committee up and running. We ran 8 workshops in different communities around Grey Highlands, and got their senior advisory committees up and going. We did the same effort in Southgate, and they have their committee up and running. South Bruce Peninsula, while we presented there, they haven't jumped on the advisory committee wagon yet, but they did assign a resident to come and sit on our council. So they were in contact. Brockton, we have 5 workshops set up in Brockton through January and February, and they're heading down the road of getting their advisory committee together. Now, if you want to gauge the commitment of this particular group, that the council, this might just demonstrate it. We have a workshop or a presentation set up at North Bruce Peninsula on February the 20th. That takes commitment, right? Of course, we're here in Saugeen tonight, and I meet with Mayor Eadie in Kincardine on Thursday. So it's starting to catch on, and we expect to have more municipalities come on side over the next couple of years as they realize these senior community advisory committees are not a threat, but they have a huge potential to be helpful. Community Advisory Committee. There is no question that these advisory committee members are the heart and soul of the Council on Aging. They are the people who will directly interface with our older adult residents, getting their input for the age-friendly plans, and they provide a local person to hear their concerns. With each CAC advisory committee providing a delegate to sit on the Council on Aging, it gives representation right across all of Grey and Bruce, and it provides the opportunity to for these delegates to hear what other municipalities are doing, and gives the opportunity to build on what's happening in other municipalities, and for Pete's sake, let's try and get rid of any duplication of effort that goes on. These delegates also will make the Council on Aging self-sustaining. Advisory committees provide a two-way communication avenue between older adult residents and your municipal council. It gives your council access to a tremendous resource of knowledge, talent, and lived experience. The final point is, and I mentioned it briefly, there are hundreds of programs and services provided by the province through our healthcare and social services system. You know, our rural seniors, rural residents, are fiercely proud and independent, and they don't ask for help until they're desperate. So it's really, really key that we get out there and we provide them, let them know what is available to them now, because they've already paid for a lot of it, and we can play a big part in that education process. I'm going to turn it over now to Jan Chamberlain to go through the age-friendly community topic areas. Take it away, Jan.
We're quite a team, aren't we, David?
There you go.
So this all happened through the World Health Organization, that's the WHO, and there are several cities around Ontario that call themselves age-friendly, and we are, in this area, the first one to do it as a rural area. And it was partly because of population. To get the funding base, we by all of Gray and Bruce going together, we have our 70,000 people, and we can actually sustain this as an organization. We've been doing this with really no funding, and it's out of the love of people wanting to get together and make things happen. So the 8 pillars that we started out with doing presentations around all of those 8, and I can honestly tell you that when we get started on which one do we want to talk about first, it's always housing. And housing is the one that most seniors really do want to stay in their communities, and they want to have rental spaces and so things like that. So there are really good ways that by working on in this organization we can give back good information. Also, each of the municipalities, as you do your planning, now we're getting bicycle lanes planned and curbsides, and so it's all part of the municipal act around the accessibility, and most of you have an accessibility committee. So really, if you think about it, we're not much different than your accessibility committees, but there are other things around that. So that's transportation. We always thought was going to be the big one, but you guys are dealing with that quite well at the county level, and with Saugeen Mobility, there's a lot of really neat things happening. So it doesn't seem to be as big a... Plus, everybody in this area seems to know they have to have a car. So they've got friends who take them to appointments, and transportation is not as high on people's concerns as having a nice place to live that they can afford. So the social participation, we're trying to get more seniors involved in things so that they will have information about all of the programs. That seems to be one of the areas where our libraries and our museums, all of that has been so helpful because people are finding that out, but not everybody. So we want to get people involved. That's what the Respect and Social Inclusion is about. And, you know, some seniors stay involved quite late in life, as we've witnessed here tonight. Around communication and information, we've been trying to work on ways that how everybody knows about the 211 number, and that when they don't know something, that's all they have to do is call that number. It's very, very important that we keep telling people that kind of thing, and then around their community support. So those are the 8 pillars that we work on all the time when we go out and talk to groups, and we do a lot of those presentations, and people are aware of that. We've had some, when we first started, we did have a committee member from this area. She's here tonight, Jane Kramer, and it's very nice that she's here tonight. So we are working on working with you about seeing if you can support this effort. And that would be by you looking at it from, because there are funding opportunities for each municipality in this area, so you would look at if you would decide to do a seniors advisory committee attached to your municipality and give us a person to be on our council. That's what we're asking for tonight, but there's lots of thinking. So I guess I'm going to just see if I can field any questions you might have, if we have time for that.
Yeah, we sure do. So thank you, Dave and Jen. Any questions from committee? I'll start here with Vice Deputy Huber.
Thank you, and thanks for recognizing Jane. I don't think she knows how to say no, so she's
that's what happens with some of us.
A good volunteer in a lot of ways and represents the best of our community. I wanted to ask you, you mentioned a couple of places that are doing workshops. Potentially, I read into it as sort of a lead into the idea of creating a committee, so I assume that the workshops were a way to kind of draw out people and inspire them in that direction. You mentioned Brockton in particular. I'm just curious, what are some of the topics of the workshops? Are you talking about like an afternoon kind of thing or an hour thing?
Well, we have actually pretty much the same presentation that we've just done here, because the goal of that in Brockton would be that they would get our advisory committee started and be able to send someone to council. So we let them talk about a lot of time in the question period. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Jan and David, thank you so much. This is a very exciting presentation.
Thank you.
An opportunity for us.
Yes.
And I think it's an interesting, I guess, occurrence that this is being made on the same night that we're having a presentation by our economic development consultant and Jessica, our economic development specialist in town, because there are so many opportunities of how a committee like this could help with our economic development strategy. I mean, we have a population. Our demographic is significant, not just in our town, but in our region.
Yes.
You mentioned the whole issue of accessibility, which we have a provincial mandate to complete by 2025, so we need that input from you too. And I would wholeheartedly support anything we can do to take advantage of the fact that your group is willing to reach out and volunteer and spend a lot of time helping us out. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Mike Matt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and hello, Jan. And
hello, Mike.
Holly. And Jan and I go back a few years. Former councillor, standing right at the podium there, and did a great job for the community, and still are, Jan, still volunteering. Good for you, and thank you for all your good work. I'm just wondering, Mr. Mayor, if this is something that, and I agree with Councillor Grace, I think it's a wonderful idea, a wonderful initiative that maybe perhaps could catch hold here in Saugeen Shores and be one of those 16 communities in Grey and Bruce counties. I think your points you've raised, what is an age-friendly community, those 8 points I think are right on. So I think there's a lot of good stuff in here. And I'm just wondering, Mr. Mayor, if this is something that we could send back to our Director of Community Services for, to talk about coming back to council with perhaps some thoughts around how this may unfold in our community and some of the processes that need to take place, the steps, and come back to a future meeting and present something to us, perhaps. Is that doable?
Yeah, I think that's, Mike, I met with Dave prior to this, and we had a pretty good discussion, and a lot of it was social, too, because we used to work at the same place, so we had some memories. But, no, I absolutely agree with you, Mike, and I think we're pretty fortunate here in Saugeen Shores that we have two very well-developed clubs or groups that do service our seniors in both communities, and I think we should reach out to those groups to see would they like to participate in this community and see how it would form going forward, because currently they do provide a lot of services to our existing seniors in both of our communities in Southampton and Port Elgin, and you may be aware of that, but I'm sure that they would bring some expertise to the group that would be valuable. So I agree with you. I think we could perhaps, with the leave of council, we'll direct Jane to see how she can bring those groups together and come back with some suggestions about how we can form this committee and then get a member for you and get moving on this.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful.
Okay, is there any other questions? Well, thanks very much, Dave and Jen, and have a safe trip home.
Oh, that's an easy one.
So the next delegation is Bruce Martin and Melanie Meyers. They're here for the Southampton BIA, and they're going to talk about their 2018 budget. Welcome, Mel and Bruce.
Good evening. My name is Melanie Meyers, and I'm the chair of the Southampton BIA, and we thank you for the chance to present our 2018 budget. This is the fourth and final budget for this current board of directors. We have built from the ground up a BIA, and in this time, each of our budgets have reflected the directives set out in our mission statement: beautification and promotion. We appreciate the help we have received from all departments in the municipality and the inclusion in discussions in committees with the opportunity to represent Southampton on topics such as streetscape, economic strategic development, and commerce in Saugeen Shores. Bruce Martin, the Southampton BIA Treasurer, will now present our budget.
Thanks, Mel. So with our 2018 budget, so our annual levy is $29,350. We have a surplus from previous years of $20,856, which gives us available funds of $50,206. So with the marketing part of our budget has four components. The first one is radio. And we have Run to Southampton in June, which is support for the Huron Shores Run. for an amount of $650. We have a new promo. It's called Neighbor Days. So it's a fall local promotion for $500. Our annual Christmas Southampton Sparkles at $3,000. Our print component of the marketing, Run to Southampton, $350. Marine Heritage Flag Quest, $500. Neighbor Days, $1,500. Christmas holiday poster, $200. A year-long branding campaign of $2,200. Third component, online and social media. We have website and domain renewal, $300. Website maintenance, $300. We started December 15th to February the 15th, a 2-month photo contest, which is for Southampton scenery photos, which gives us the BIA potential promotional material, $1,000. Facebook ads, $200. Local newspaper targeted ads, $400. Promotions, we have Festive Fridays. As a Christmas promotion, we've budgeted $800 for that. And last in marketing, we have our trolley, the Saugeen Trolley, which is our annual sponsorship of $1,500, which gives the marketing component of our budget $13,400. Under beautification, we have our High Street flower baskets, $3,600. Bike racks and garbage receptacles, $5,000. Downtown gateway signs, $6,000. And bike initiative support, $2,000, for a subtotal there of $16,600. And administration, we have office rent of $90, employee wages of $10,000. On February 20th is our AGM. Notice for that meeting in the social is $650. Office supplies $500. So administration is $11,240. It gives us a total budget of $41,240, and we'll be using approximately half of our surplus to supplement our 2018 levy. Questions, comments?
Thank you, Melanie. And Bruce, any questions for Vice Deputy Mayor Hubert?
Thank you. There were two items that kind of caught my attention, so I just wondered if you might make a couple of additional comments about them. The concept of neighborhood days. You said one little sentence. Can you maybe give us an idea of, and I had one other one too, but could you give us an idea of what that promotion or what that idea or concept is all about?
Okay, that's why I brought Melanie along. She was more familiar with that that committee.
I do sit on the promotions committee, so a little bit of information on that is a seed and idea right now to invite neighboring communities to come to our community to shop and dine and spend their dollars.
Cool idea. The other one that caught my eye, the downtown gateway signs. I'm a little bit curious about that because we have sort of a no billboard, no ground signs in that area. So did you have any sense of what you were thinking about in terms of gateway signs? Because it's a nice idea too.
We have something very specific in mind. So with the consultant that did the streetscape planning for Southampton 4 or 5 years ago, SGL, one of their suggestions was downtown gateway signs. So the fact that High Street is perpendicular to Highway 21. So for example, using a period light standard that we have on High Street and having one, so if you're coming from the south, so on the right hand side, somewhere just off the sidewalk on the highway, I'm going to say by the town hall. So so prior to hitting the intersection, you see a sign that says Southampton downtown. And so it'd have a banner on it with that, and there'd be a period light. And then you'd also have one coming from the north, kind of by the laundromat. So again, just announcing the downtown shopping area just before you hit the main intersection. That's the plan for that.
Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to say thank you to your board, all your volunteers, your busy people. You spend a tremendous amount of time, not just on this, but on other committees, and so thank you very much.
Councillor Madison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, Mel and Bruce, I'd just like to say congratulations. You started 4 years ago with basically nothing, and you've worked up from there, and I believe the Southampton BIA is a very strong and vibrant organization, and you're doing great things for the town, so please keep it up. Think about what you're going to do after the end of your term. Hopefully stay involved. That would be great.
Yeah.
Further questions? Just before you go again, just you mentioned your annual general meeting. Can you just tell us again so everybody knows and where you're going to have it?
It will be held at the Legion in Southampton, and the date is Tuesday, February 20th.
20?
Yes, I believe I have that right. Is that a Tuesday? If anyone's looking at their calendar. Yes, and an announcement will be in the newspaper as well as invites going out with a social time to follow.
Well, thank you very much. And best of luck to both. To the BIA. Thank you, Bruce. And our next delegation then is Lise Morton. She's VP of Nuclear Waste Management, and she's here on the Ontario Power Generation Update. Welcome, Lise.
Thank you, Your Worship and Councillors.
I know you have some other people with you. If you want to introduce them, by all means, go ahead.
I was absolutely, yes. So thank you for the opportunity to present an update today from Ontario Power Generation. So here with me tonight, I've got Fred Kuntz, who's our Manager of Corporate Communications, and I believe many of you know him. I've also got with me Brad Ellsworth, who's our Manager of Operations out at the Western site, and Brad's been with us for well over 15 years, I believe. And I've also got Gary Manili here with us, and he's our Section Manager of Maintenance. So these two individuals are responsible for the day-to-day operation of our Western Waste Management Facility, and certainly bring a lot of experience with them and live locally as well as I do. So again, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today, and I've just got a brief update on a few matters. So I'll just cover a couple things, such as a bit of an update on our Western Waste Management Facility, an update on the Deep Geologic Repository, on our nuclear refurbishment at Darlington, and a few other OPG updates as well. So in terms of our Western Waste Management Facility, we had a very successful year in 2017. We continued our very strong safety record with no injuries to staff, no lost time accidents. It's been well over 6 years since we've had any lost time accident within our Nuclear Waste Management Division, and we're very proud of that record. And we also continued a very strong record with respect to our transportation and continued very safe transportation of radioactive waste. You might recall that last year we went to the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission in Ottawa, and we received a 10-year renewal of our operating license. So the Western Waste Management Facility is good till 2027 in terms of operation. And part of that license was also seeking the ability to expand the site. And so you see there a list on the slide of various buildings that we are looking at building. And that gets us through a 10-year period at the site, while there are a few other buildings as well. So again, just to reiterate, we received the low and intermediate level waste from Darlington, Pickering, and Bruce Power, and we process that waste at the site and store it. And then we also receive the used fuel from the Bruce Power Station only, and process that waste as well at the site and store it there. We're also looking at building and designing, we're currently in the middle of designing a waste processing building that allows us to sort and look for opportunities for free release of some of that waste, decontamination, diversion of some of the waste, so that we can do everything that we can in terms of reducing the environmental footprint. And certainly Brad and Gary are intimately involved with the waste sorting that we currently do now, and it's been a very successful program for us. In terms of the Deep Geologic Repository, so just a few brief words. So you'll likely recall that in August, the Federal Minister of the Environment and Climate Change provided us with a letter asking for another information update. And in this case, it was to update our analysis of the project, and in particular, incorporating the effects on Saugeen Ojibwe Nation. And her letter indicated that the results of our analysis must include the results of SON's community process. And so we continue to work with SON. We remain engaged in a very respectful, meaningful dialogue with SON, and we believe the discussions are going well. We're very respectful of the timeline that SON needs in their community, and although we don't have a firm timeline, SON has indicated that this will take at least a year. But again, we are continuing to work with SON through that process. We continue to maintain that the DGR is the right thing to do, following the Joint Review Panel conclusions, that it protects the lake and the environment, and that it's the lasting solution for low and intermediate level waste. And while the approvals process is taking longer than originally envisioned, we certainly recognize and appreciate the support of the Willing Host Community Kincardine, as well as the adjacent municipalities, and we appreciate your support and your patience as we work through this project. Going over to refurbishment, so the two largest infrastructure projects in Canada are the refurbishment of the Darlington and the Bruce Power facilities. So it's quite telling, really, that the two largest infrastructure projects in Canada have very much a tie to this area, and I think that speaks well to the economic development that we're seeing in the area as well. So OPG is right now in the middle of our first unit. We're almost at a little past the halfway mark of Darlington Unit 2. And in the middle of refurbishing that unit. And the project at Darlington is a 10-year project to go through each of the 4 units. And then, of course, our nuclear waste management division, and specifically the Western Waste Management Site, has a key role in Bruce Power's major component replacement that, of course, they're preparing for a breaker open in 2020. So we accept the waste that comes from those projects. And so, again, we're working very collaboratively with Bruce Power, having a lot of lessons learned and information sharing between the two companies in terms of what it's like to do these kinds of refurbishments. And in terms of refurbishment, there's been quite a bit of important recognition and support in recent months, and just to highlight a little bit of that. So first, as I'm sure you're aware, the province of Ontario released the long-term energy plan for the next 20 years. And the plan really highlights the important role that nuclear plays in the province's energy mix in terms of a source of low-cost, reliable, and clean energy. And the long-term energy plan does point to the fact that the refurbishments at the Darlington and Bruce stations are vital to maintaining that supply of energy. A second report that also came out in November was the Financial Accountability Office report. And again, that report provides some detail in terms of the economic benefits as well that come out of the refurbishment at Darlington and Bruce. And again, confirms that refurbishment is the best option for keeping electricity costs lower in the long run. And then just a few other OPG updates. So although the majority of our electricity in Ontario comes from nuclear power, OPG also has 66 hydroelectric stations across Ontario. And the biggest, of course, is Beck at Niagara Falls, that many people are aware of. But in 2017, we also opened a new station, Peter Sutherland, and it's north of Timmins, and it's quite a large station, and it helps provide power to homes in northeastern Ontario. And it's another example where OPG is very proud of the relationship that we built with the local First Nation in that area, which is a full partner in the project. And then lastly, in terms of the Ontario Energy Board, so the Ontario Energy Board is currently considering a rate application that OPG submitted in 2017. It's a two-part decision. So in December, the board approved the recovery of the Darlington refurbishment costs and the extended operation of Pickering in terms of cost recovery. And then the second stage of the decision will be on the rate itself, and that's likely to come in the first quarter of 2018. So OPG is the only electricity generator in Ontario whose rates are subject to public review and public hearings. And our rates continue to be 40% less than other generators, and we don't expect that to change as a result of any rate decision that's going to be happening this year. And so that's the end of the update. I wanted to keep it relatively short so that I could open it up for any questions.
Thank you, Lise. Any questions from Councillor Grace?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Lise and team. I wonder, it'd be possible to go back to slide 4. I think that was the one about the DGR. And I just had a clarification question about the cost that's cited in the last clause there, $1 billion. Could you explain maybe further what that $1 billion would be covering?
Yes, so thank you for the question. And so the $1 billion cost, I believe, and we've discussed this at the DGR hearings, but just to reiterate as well, is the construction cost for the DGR. And that's still current estimates as we submitted to the province actually last year. Okay. And so just as a follow-up, last year in your submission that you sent to the ministry, in December of 2016. That's the report that we talked about in council at the end of February. That report cites the total cost through licensing and regulatory approvals, construction, retrieval operations, and decommissioning as $2.4 billion. Correct.
So what I'm wondering is, for a member of the public, a taxpayer looking at that slide, it wouldn't be an unreasonable assumption for them to look at that and say, okay, that means that's going to be the total cost, $1 billion. So what I'm wondering is it possible for you to add a clause in there indicating, you know, for members of the public who want to be accurate, that $1 billion is construction?
Yeah, so certainly again, and I believe, you know, we've been public about this. So yes, just to be very clear, and thank you for the comment on clarity. So it's $1 billion construction cost, and then the total life cycle costs are $2.4 billion. So we can certainly add that into presentations, etc. And I think the only other thing that's important to make sure that the public is aware of as well, though, is that those costs are already fully funded. So there is a segregated fund that is put aside to capture the long-term life cycle costs of all waste management, and that's already fully funded. But thank you for the comment on clarity.
Thank you.
Councillor Dave Mayette.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Lise, for your presentation. And certainly your presentation covers all areas of OPG's business, and I appreciate that. And being a former employee of OPG and formerly Ontario Hydro before that, I can appreciate all the good work that it does, and especially during periods of cold that we've experienced over the past couple of weeks. But with regards to the DGR, you will recall that we passed a motion, albeit not unanimously, but in support of the DGR about a year ago, and I for one remain in favor of the technology that's being incorporated there, proposed. But could you just, for clarification point, remind us once again why the decision has been made to promote the low and intermediate waste DGR ahead of the spent fuel DGR? Why does the one take priority over the other?
I was about to say Lise Morton for the record because we're so used to the public hearing in the CNSC. So thank you for the question on that. I don't think it actually is a matter of promoting one over the other. It's just simply the time frames in which the two projects are proceeding. So again, just to recall for everybody, in terms of used fuel and seeking a willing host community for used fuel, that's being managed by NWMO, which is a separate entity, Nuclear Waste Management Organization, and there's sometimes confusion between my division within OPG and NWMO, so it is a separate company. But so NWMO is in the process of seeking a willing host community, and their process is called adaptive phase management. And so there's quite a lengthy timeline in terms of finding their willing host community, doing geological studies, etc. And they recently narrowed down their list of communities slightly. So their time frame is just longer in terms of reaching a point of having a repository in service. But I don't think it's a matter of necessarily promoting one faster or ahead of the other. And it's simply just a difference between our time frame and theirs.
Councillor Minaj.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, as I sit here and I listen to you and I listen to John Mann, and this is the fourth year as a member of council, and I recall making presentation in front of the JRP as well, and is that what they call it? and what I recall is a very informative public open house here that was completed many years ago that explained all of the ins and outs and the reasons, the positive reasons for doing the DGR. I must say I'm losing my way here. I cannot. I used to wear those plastic suits and used to have the contamination on me, and I know that we've talked about rags, and we've talked about what it is that's going to be part of the low and intermediate waste, and I'm losing my conviction that a DGR on the BNPD site is the right answer for low and intermediate waste. I've been strongly firm about irradiated fuel. We're not allowed to call it spent fuel or used fuel. It's irradiated fuel because it probably can be used again, and that's why we're storing it. That's why we'd want to store it underground. So it sounds like it's counterintuitive for me, because I would be in favor of a DGR for our irradiated fuel on site at the BNPD, but I'm really losing it against low and intermediate waste, the amount of cost. So I would appreciate another open house type forum, if it could be arranged, where it shows how we're dealing with that waste today. Because I don't believe that it's the kind of waste, it's the kind of radiation that I've been involved in my career that is lethal to the Great Lakes. And I'm losing that concept that we have to do it this way. So I would like to see another open house presentation, if possible, that gives all the detail and re-explains it, because it's been so long now that I can't remember all of the good reasons why we thought low and intermediate waste should go 1,600 feet below ground level, and I'm not there. So I'd appreciate that help if you can provide it.
Thank you, and definitely we're always open to open houses and very open to whatever forms that we can help provide any details, etc. And I won't try to convince at this point, but suffice it to say that certainly I'm willing to take that discussion offline. And I think it's important to realize that low and intermediate level waste, and low level waste in particular, is more than rags and mops. We incinerate and we compact and we treat the rags and mops. But at the end of the day, you still end up with a byproduct that is left behind, whether that be incinerator ash or whether it be some large metal components. There are a variety of low-level waste streams that still need to have a final disposal solution. And surface storage in perpetuity is not a permanent solution. And then intermediate level waste is a different story again, because both of these waste streams will remain radioactive for many years to come. But again, I absolutely thank you for that and all. I know Fred's keeping notes, and certainly we'll look at what opportunities we have to re-engage in terms of open houses. Thank you.
No further questions? Well, thank you very much, Lise, for the update. It's always nice to hear from you. Thank you for So that's the end of our delegations, and the next item on the agenda then is a general government report. It's a staff report, and it has to do with our economic development strategic plan. We have a presentation, but I believe our Jessica is going to introduce our presenter. So Jessica, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This evening I'm looking forward to introducing in a minute Aileen Murray. So in August of 2017, Mellor Murray Consulting and Goddard and Associates was awarded the contract to do the Economic Development Strategic Plan. So we're really looking forward to presenting that this evening. Aileen has gone through a number. The process included community consultation through one-on-one interviews, internal and external, as well as a workshop with our Economic Development Advisory Committee. This Economic Development Strategic Plan aligns with Priority 1 of our Corporate Strategic Plan, which is to facilitate appropriate growth throughout the town of Saugeen Shores. So welcome Aileen Murray, and she's going to present the strategic plan to us and certainly can answer any questions at the end. Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. I'm very pleased to be here this evening, and thank you. I'm very pleased to be here this evening and bring to you this report for your review. I understand that the objective is that you would receive it this evening, and then it will go away for further discussion on how implementation would go forward for further approvals at various stages throughout the process. So I just wanted to start with a bit of a review of what actually Saugeen Shores has received as far as deliverables through this process. We did a findings and issues report which looked at the economic and demographic profile of the area trends, and we did a benchmarking exercise to compare Saugeen Shores to other communities. We did a review of best practices where we looked at other economic development organizations across the province and some activities that could be regarded as best practice that may be considered. I should go back and mention in the findings and issues report we did broad consultation in the community, and we looked at previous efforts and previous studies and directions, and looked at regional activities as well. We met with your Economic Development Advisory Committee and reviewed the findings and issues report and talked about best practices, and through that process identified some strategic priorities, and so there was a report on that exercise. And then tonight, I believe you've received a copy of the Economic Development Strategy, and I will be reviewing with you the outcomes of that document, which includes goals, objectives, and actions, an implementation plan, and some performance measures. So the agenda that I'd like to speak to tonight is talk a little bit about the strategic planning process we went through, the economic priorities that were identified through that priority setting section workshop, the vision and mission, which we would propose for your consideration, goals and related actions related to the priorities, those actions that we think are really important for you to act on first, and then how you might go ahead and measure those. So it was a 4-step process, starting with research and analysis. So document review, as I mentioned earlier, economic analysis. We did a review of your planning documents and your planning processes, and provided an initial findings report. Then we did a benchmarking comparison where we looked at how Saugeen Shores did compare to other communities, and we looked at comparable communities close by and also other communities that had a dominant industry that really impacted the other economic activity in the region. The consultation involved a series of interviews in the community, and then we did produce that findings and issues report, which is referenced in brief in this report, but is also available for your review. As I mentioned earlier, in the strategy development, the EDAC committee was very involved in that, in helping us to establish the priorities, and we had a draft strategic plan which they reviewed, provided feedback on, and we are now at the final step on that process, presenting to council. So just a very quick highlight of some of the data that was included in that findings and issues report. The communities that you see listed in this slide, or those communities that I mentioned earlier that were part of that benchmarking exercise, Owen Sound obviously quite nearby, so I would have that that similarity. And these other communities, again, had a dominant industry that impacted how the rest of their economy worked. And so as you can see in this particular comparison, the notable point is that Saugeen Shores, the population growth between 2011 and 2016 exceeded all of the other communities that we were comparing by quite a notable number, 8.3%. When we looked at the intra-provincial migration rate, so people coming from other places within the province into Saugeen Shores, the growth 17.3%. Again, compared to other places in Ontario and Canada, quite remarkable, the difference. When we look at the education level, Saugeen Shores has a higher number of the workers that have, a population rather, that have trades education, which again, it makes all kinds of sense given the predominance of industry here. Also of note is the lower level of those individuals who do not have a high school education, and I think those two things combined really, again, speak to the economic conditions in the area, but also the opportunities for other types of employment and industry. So one tool that economic developers use quite a lot when we look at measuring the robustness of a community, we use a thing called the location quotient, or LQ as it's referenced in this slide for short. Basically what a location quotient does is it looks at the ratio of concentration of employment or industry or occupations compared to a larger region. And so in the first example, actually in both of these examples, we're looking at the employment in Ontario, the employment in Saugeen Shores in the utility sectors is 36 times as concentrated in Saugeen Shores compared to Canada. So 36 times more people working in the utilities sector compared to the general population in Canada. Not a surprise to you, of course, but that's a pretty remarkable number. We don't see location quotients of that scale or magnitude very often. The other areas where we do see high location quotients, although clearly not nearly as high as the utility sector, are arts, entertainment, recreation, accommodation, and food services. And just to give you an indication, we get excited when we see a location quotient of 2. So 36 is pretty remarkable. Other areas where there's high concentration, employment and industry, we see in the tourism, retail, and personal services area. Another area of note we thought was quite interesting is the commuting value. Typically in a rural community, you would see a lower commuting number because people are working in agriculture, so that a lot of them, they work at home. They're not commuting very far. If they do commute, it's into an urban center in a larger rural area, so the commutes aren't terribly significant. And so when we look at those comparator numbers, again, 47% of the population of Saugeen Shores live and work in the same municipality compared to Timmins, where 95% of the people that live in Timmins also work in that community. The income profile, the median household income in Saugeen Shores is $88,000 a year, which is 18% higher than the Ontario average and 72% higher than your neighbors in Owen Sound. Yeah, pretty remarkable. 44% of the households in Saugeen Shores, their income is a minimum of $100,000 a year, and 12% report an income of over $200,000 a year. 12%, again, a very high number for that level of income when you're looking at 3% in Owen Sound and 8% as an Ontario average. The income profile, just to further explore that, 14% of the employment income earners in Saugeen Shores are self-employed, and that number is slightly lower than the Ontario and Canada numbers, and again that would be as a result of what we're seeing with the utility sector in the area. Also a lower share of low income and poverty in this area, 9.3%, and it's lower than Ontario, Canada, and 3 of the 4 benchmark communities. The cost of living, unfortunately, doesn't carry on the same positive story. You're not in a bad position, but 44% of renters in this area are spending more than 30% of their total income on shelter. 30% is a benchmark number we like to look at as a positive threshold. We'd like to see renters under that number. Of course, we know what's happening in Toronto and other urban areas in Canada, so there's a lot of pressure for renters. Housing starts per population, just a comparison of what's happening in Saugeen Shores in Ontario, and that certainly speaks to the dramatic population growth that you've had in this area. So that was a very quick run through of some demographic data and it gives you a sense of where Saugeen Shores stands. That combined with our consultation, like I said, that we did with the local stakeholders and the business community, we identified with the Economic Development Advisory Committee 5 areas of priority: investment, so attracting high quality firms to Saugeen Shores; entrepreneurship, so boosting those numbers of self-employed and small businesses; people, making sure that when you're attracting people that you've got a balance in those people that you're bringing to the community, and you're bringing people with the skills that the employers and the prospective employers to this area need to continue to grow and to be attracted to this area. Planning, so making sure that you have the environment where it is easy to do business, so it is not a barrier to further investment and expansion of activity here. And then finally, capacity, making sure that you have the tools and the resources that are required to achieve your economic development vision. So based on those strategic priorities, what we did then is develop a vision and a mission, and from each of those, with those as the foundation, there were those 5 strategic priority areas. So we've got a goal and an objective that aligns with each of those, and then a series of actions that come under each of those goals and objectives. So the vision, and I understand that it's not so easy to read in your package, so I apologize for that. But the vision, as we've proposed it for you, is that Saugeen Shores is a growing, welcoming community committed to enhancing economic potential for businesses and entrepreneurs and ensuring an exceptional quality of life that attracts residents of all ages and cultures. So to unpack that a little bit, you are certainly growing now, making sure that the community is a welcoming one to those particularly to those individuals that will provide that economic potential for businesses and support businesses and entrepreneurs in the area, and ensuring that through that growth that you are providing an exceptional quality of life for the residents that are here, but it also provides that attractive environment for residents to continue to come to the area. And all ages and cultures, we recognize that Canada in total is in a negative growth situation when it comes to the resident population. So an immigrant attraction policy for Canada and Ontario and Saugeen Shores, we think, are very important components to making sure that you do continue to grow the population to serve the growing needs of the business base here. And on the mission, so the mission is how Saugeen Shores will achieve that vision, and the mission would be to establish a balanced, vibrant economy through managed growth, strategic investment, and collaboration. So the strategic plan, there were 5 goals and objectives. Again, they aligned with those strategic priorities, and we'll go through those in a little bit of detail. There are 37 strategic actions. I'm not going to read them to you tonight unless you want me to. They are in the document, and we'll certainly talk about them in broader strokes through the goals and objectives. We've identified the partners that we think are important to support those actions, identified some level of priority, those that we think are critical as the do those first, and then high and medium, and then a time frame. Things that would be an ongoing activity that you would continue to do year after year, some that you would do in the first year, second, and third year. The challenge, of course, is that we want you to do everything immediately, and we know that that's not fair to anyone, the Economic Development Advisory Committee, Jessica, or Council, who's going to be expecting a whole bunch of things that just won't happen. So we've tried to break that out a little bit. So the goals then, first of all, business growth and investment. The second, an entrepreneurial culture. I should say here that the trend across Canada, across Ontario, we're seeing a growth, a rise in the number of independent and small businesses across the country, across North America, and Saugeen Shores is slightly below those numbers, and of course that's reflective of the very strong utility sector that you have here, but it is something that we'd like to see to balance out your economy somewhat. A rich, diverse talent pool so that the ability to grow is not hampered by a lack of talent, a lack of labor with the appropriate skills to continue investment. A resident and investment-friendly community, so making sure that your policies are supportive of the business activities. And Councillor Grace and I did have a conversation about that prior to Council. We're talking about appropriate growth, of course, appropriate development, but making sure that your policies and your procedures do not hamper that inadvertently. And then finally having the economic development capacity. So that's basically just boots on the ground that are able to actually do the work. So you will note in the strategic plan document that we've detailed these actions. There's more meat to them, but basically under business growth and investment, the objective is to build on the established sector strengths in Saugeen Shores, so utilities for sure, but also tourism and services, to attract and expand business investment in Saugeen Shores. And you'll see that there's a number of activities there. Business retention and expansion is a very important component of economic development, and that's working with your existing business base to make sure that they have the supports that they need, that they have access to the tools and the resources that they need to grow. That is the most cost-effective and the best use of an economic development officer that I know is a business retention and expansion program. The others pretty much speak for themselves, with the exception of the CRM system. It's a customer relationships management system. It's basically computer software to help your staff to stay on top of the needs and the issues that their various contacts are addressing, and it provides some rich data that your staff will be able to come back to you and say, these are the issues we're seeing, how many people are addressing these types of issues, these are opportunities, and you'll have some data that you'll be able to work with so that your future strategic plans will be that much stronger. Working with the Bruce Power Economic Development Committee is, again, an important one. I said I wasn't going to go through all of them, but there's a number of items related to the tourism and tourism development. We know that you've been working for a number of years with the Chamber of Commerce. We would encourage you to take a look at that agreement and establish some performance measures in that area, some metrics, so that you have a clear understanding of what it is that you are receiving as part of that relationship and what your objectives, your collective objectives are. Under an entrepreneurial culture, again, there's a number of elements here, but basically we're looking to provide programs and partnerships that educate, mentor, incubate, and finance entrepreneurs and startups to make sure that you have that entrepreneurial culture to encourage that type of development here. And there's a number of great examples across Ontario and in rural communities of how people are doing that work. One of the keys is to identify where there are gaps in your product and your service delivery now. What are those things that people have to leave the community because they can't find them locally? And starting there, identifying those gaps, and then making sure that you share that information with people who may be interested in establishing that type of operation, giving them that start. Another component that we think is really important is trying to ensure that you don't create any additional gaps by having a succession plan for those older business owners that are looking for an escape clause, looking for a retirement plan to assist them with that. Under a rich, diverse talent pool, the objective would be to develop targeted resident and worker attraction programs to support business needs. So working closely with the business community to identify what types of workers they need, and then targeting people and prospective residents that have those skills. We know that when people are looking for a place to live, they're also looking at what their employment opportunities are. They're obviously very, very closely tied. So being on the other end of that and communicating those needs as part of your resident attraction program is very, very powerful. And working to make this community an immigrant attractive community. There are a number of different programs that you can implement to do that, and I know that that's something that's happening at the county level, so that a coordinated effort there would be very good. We've also, we'd like to see further engagement with the Post-Secondary Education Institute environment. There's some tremendous work that's happening in this region. The post-secondary education institutions are always looking for opportunities to expand their research base, to expand their students' experiential learning opportunities. So beginning those connections and connecting those institutions with the employers and the firms in this area would be really helpful. Number 4 was a resident and investment-friendly community. So the objective is to establish the infrastructure, the programs that facilitate business investment and growth, making sure that you have sufficient employment land. So we talked about a 20-year land supply. Having an online inventory of available building and land. So if I am a prospective investor, it's very easy for me to figure out what the opportunities are. Where could I build? Where could I go? Is there a building for me now? You have community improvement plans in place right now, but expanding those to fill those niche areas would be very helpful. Another piece, make it really, really easy for prospective investors to come here through a developer's guideline, so they have clear understanding of what's expected from them at what time, how long is it going to take, what are the things that I need to do to make sure that on my side I'm facilitating this. We also understand the challenges with housing and some limitations in the housing supply, and we suggested a couple of ideas in that area. Working with housing developers and talking about a broader range of housing options, including more rental and more price-sensitive housing options, because we want to make sure that you're not only attracting residents that work in those 100,000 plus households, but you need people to work in those service roles as well, if you're going to have a balanced economy, and they need to live in places that they're happy in and that are safe and comfortable and available. The other one, which is a bigger reach, but I always like to have a few of those in a strategy, is considering and talking to some of your key industry leaders about the feasibility of a public-private partnership to ensure that you do have housing at those lower price points. And then finally, economic development capacity. And as a former economic developer in the trenches, this is always one that's close to my heart. That's making sure that you have the human and financial resources and you are leveraging the partnerships to implement your economic development strategy. Again, making sure you have the horses to get the job done. We've said that we think you you need full-time work there. I know that there's some discussion about that. That's as consultants, that's our opinion. We know that that's something you'll need to work through at the administrative level. There are a number of county and regional and provincial economic development programs that Saugeen Shores can take advantage of, and we want to make sure that you're leveraging all of those. We think that one of the most powerful ways to do that is to bring all of the partners that have some role in economic development, from the chambers and the BIAs and the county and people in the real estate department and industry members that are interested, and the Workforce Planning Board. Bring them together on a regular basis annually to talk about your economic development strategy, to talk about everyone's contribution and how you're all working forward together on a unified vision. And then finally, of course, as a former economic developer, I want to make sure that you are providing sufficient funds to fulfill all these tasks that we're putting forward. So those are the overall actions that we'd like to see you. Again, I went through them very quickly because I don't think anybody wants to hear me read every individual one. We do have in an action plan every action identified, and we've given you some suggestions on what we think would be appropriate as far as timing, when you might want to take those on, and priority levels. And you can see there's a number of these, so it's a lot of slides and a lot of small print, but they are in the document. The critical actions, those ones that we think are most important for you to take a look at, we'd like you to look at the Tourism Service Agreement and establish some performance measures and consider your role and how that relationship works. We want you to take a look and make sure that you do have sufficient employment land to support the investment that could come to this area. An online, searchable online inventory, there's certainly some labor involved in getting that active on a website, but once it's in place, then the maintenance is pretty easy to do, and it's not, in the scheme of things, it's not an expensive venture. A developer's guideline document will save you and your staff and your planning department a whole host of challenges and provide a much more welcoming environment if everyone's clear on what the expectations are. Expediting the permitting and development processes, so continuing to review how can we make it easier, how can we speed things through, can we look at this document collectively as a group as opposed to independently, so that we're doing things in a way that facilitates development. Again, appropriate development with the appropriate guidelines in place, but how can we make that as friendly as possible to prospective investors? Looking at the housing market and assessing what the capacity is, and providing a workshop where you bring all of those players together to talk about what Saugeen Shores wants, not just what the developers want for this area. The staffing, and then committing the sufficient funds to fulfill the economic development strategy. Those are what we're recommending as a critical action. So those would be the things that we'd take a look at first. And then I always like to look at the one page that summarizes what your strategy, and so if we were to do that, I would say this is it. Your vision is a growing, welcoming community committed to enhancing your economic potential for businesses and entrepreneurs and ensuring an exceptional quality of life that attracts residents of all ages and cultures. You're establishing a balanced, vibrant economy through managed growth, strategic investment, and collaboration, and you have 5 goals which are listed there. So I know I speak very quickly when I get going on these things, so I apologize for that, and I'd certainly welcome any questions.
Thank you, Elaine. Questions? Councillor Dave Mayette.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you, thank you, Eileen. That was a great presentation, and as a former member of the Saugeen Shores Economic Development Committee, a committee I very much miss being on, by the way, I'm glad to see that a lot of the things that we were talking about then have a central role in this plan, and I'm particularly excited about a couple of things. A lot of it, like all of it really, but a couple of things really stood out for me, which is I'm glad to see sporadically throughout here is a focus on agriculture, because it's not only the ward that I represent is quite a bit of an agricultural area, but it's something that we overlook. We don't just we think about it. We drive by the fields and the farms, and we just kind of take them for granted. But it's a significant, if not by people, certainly it's a significant economic driver in our community. And the other one that I picked up on, which I don't think we talked about in the 2 years that I was on the committee, but it's something that I'm becoming more passionate. And in fact, there's a growing group of people that I've been talking to who are interested in bringing the education sector here and starting in Saugeen Shores training facility. And we send, and I'm one of the parents who send our children away at great expense to become trained, and hopefully they might come back here one day and get jobs in the area. But if not, we're spending a great deal of our money sending people away. And you mentioned that earlier, is what do we go out of town for? Education is one of the main things that we go out of town for, and there's a lot of skills and a lot of talent and a lot of people who are passionate about this area. So I'm really hopeful that that's going to come to fruition. And thirdly, the biggest stumbling block we have, and I think the people, some of the entrepreneurs in the room will agree, is the housing, is getting affordable housing for people to work in those service sector jobs. It's they're pushed out by the big jobs, and unfortunately that's shown in that commuting number as well. As all those service people, a lot of them have to live in outlying communities. So if we could solve that problem as well, I think we're on good stead to move forward, and I'm really excited about the plan and also the weeks, months, and years ahead. Thanks.
Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a couple of specific questions for Eileen, and one that probably Jessica could answer more directly. The first one was about the slide. It's slide 13, about the cost of shelter. And I guess I just wanted a clarification. Is that just rent and mortgage payments only, or are you including the total cost of shelter in terms of utilities, insurance?
I am not. I will have to admit, I am not the economist on our team.
Do you know?
But yes, my understanding is that is the cost for the shelter itself. So that's the rental cost. It is not those other components, and that's the concern, because 30% is quite a high number when you think about all the other things that go on with the cost of living.
Absolutely. So my next question is actually related to one of the last pages in your report, page 39, and you talked about it as one of a critical priority. It's number 6, which is expedite Saugeen Shores permitting and development processes, align municipal, county, and other approval agencies to facilitate the development process. So, I totally agree. I think everybody around the table does. And just from my observations, being on the planning committee now and having been a sub on the planning committee previous to this, one of the challenges we have as a town is that we've got this extra step of going through the county. So, if you could work, if you have suggestions, you're suggesting that we have a different format where right now, we're sort of waiting for the county to bring applications, reports to us, and I know it can be really frustrating, especially for, housing developers, and there may be very good reasons why that backlog or why that delay is taking place, but it's something that, I'm not, if you could help us or give us suggestions of where we could go to expedite things.
So, again, there's a variety of different approaches. I know that there are some communities that have gone into agreements with the county level, and they've actually outsourced their planning activity to the county so that the county is responsible. They still report back to the municipality, but the county actually administers both components. That's one suggestion, and I'm not saying that's the appropriate one for you, but it is one way that's done. Some communities, they have agreements with the county. They have established level agreements about how long the county approval process is going to take. I don't know what your relationship with the county is and whether that's something that is a possibility. Others, they bring the county to the table to planning discussions, and so if there is a prospective investment, the county, the planning department, engineering, outside agencies, anyone who would be responsible or working on development projects, they would all discuss it at one table at one time, so that, again, you're expediting the process that way, so that you're not waiting for the county to provide feedback, which needs to be considered by the municipality, and then it has to go back to the county. You can have that discussion at the same time. So those are three different approaches, but they do all have some merit.
Okay, thank you. So my last question is for Jessica, and I think I've already talked to Jessica about this, but just in terms of the critical priority, and we see the time frame on those charts of being year one, and I know there are lots of different factors that would contribute to what happens with this particular recommended action, but within that year one, are we talking about probably thinking that recommended action, we'd be trying to get that completed within the first year? Is that generally what we're looking at? Or
yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, at this point, it's difficult for me to answer that. Tomorrow we have an EDAC meeting where the committee will be having an overview of this document, and then in following meetings, we'll be really starting to pull it apart and decide if this action plan that Eileen's recommended does make sense to us. So I'm looking forward to that conversation tomorrow with the committee, but certainly what Eileen has identified resonates with me and resonates with a number of committee members that I have discussed with. So I'm looking forward and can certainly follow up on what those timelines may look like.
Vice Deputy Mayor Huber.
Thank you, and thanks for clarifying why you chose a couple of those communities. I must have missed that. I couldn't make the connection to Portage la Prairie, but I do now. I had four comment. There might be a question in here somewhere. I think that one of the areas that perhaps can somehow get emphasized more is this resident attraction idea. I didn't pick up overall in the big document a sense that one of the big potential areas is about attracting particularly retirees here. And so it doesn't sort of jump out from the document as a potential economic driver. And, the quality of life is mentioned a couple of times, and, and every now and again resident attraction shows up in there. But I think we've done a reasonable job at getting people to convert from cottages to being here full time. And, we're seeing, people coming to work at the nuclear power plant, and then their parents retiring here. And I think there's a market there that there's elements in here, but just to capture it all together. And one of the elements that I thought was not, again, jumping out at me was health and recreation gets mentioned every now and again, but cultural elements only seem to fit in as a tourism-related driver. And I think that there's a whole opportunity there that fits in with the quality of life thing. So I'll just throw that out as a comment. I also, in the number one section about business growth, and didn't jump out at me that one of the items on the list as an opportunity was related to, it might fit in under personal services, I don't know, but because you didn't have them all defined, but the medical sector, we just had the announcement of a big jump in beds at the Southampton Care Centre. There's potential for some daycare spaces to be built in Port Elgin. We've got a lot of doctors and chiropractors and dentists here. We just had a development through about a new building at the south end of town for a rather large facility. Again, I think that that fits in as a real potential for us to do some attracting, and that would service people living here, but also draw people in. And when those people come in like to the new ER lab facility at the hospital, when they come in from out of the area, we have a chance to keep them here for lunch or for dinner or whatever. So, that all fits together. I did want to mention, though, two things specifically that were in the actual bigger report. On page 12, there was a comment about NIMBYism, and we don't often hear that expression here. It's come up more over the last few years, but I guess I would rather that we think about it as, we've had a number of businesses and people choose to move here or choose to open a business here or buy a business here, to already invest here. And so this idea that the not in my backyard, that those people who've already made that choice to come here don't have something really relevant to say in the discussion, I think there's a balance there. So, and I appreciate you, I think you used the expression a number of times about appropriate development, appropriate timing, and appropriate planning and all that kind of stuff. So the use of the word NIMBYism, I guess, I would rather that we start from a place of it's about respect for, balancing what is here already and working in some new elements, because, there are incredible neighborhoods here that, exist and have existed for 100 years. Perhaps those aren't the best places to start throwing in townhouses and row housing and apartment buildings. But then there are some other neighborhoods where that just makes sense. So that just kind of, gave me pause. The other one that gave me a little bit of pause was on page 19. It was in your SWOT analysis, and you put as a weakness this divide between Southampton and Port Elgin, and I don't think we'll ever get away from that until, the province determines on a map that no longer is it Southampton and Port Elgin on the map. It just shows up as Saugeen Shores. But I guess one of the things, I don't see it as a weakness that there's, and I don't see it as a divide either, but one of the interesting things about our community is we do have different areas, not unlike Toronto, which has different neighborhoods or different sort of just special kind of vibes in different regions. And I guess I think that's a selling point, because there are some people that prefer whatever that vibe is in Southampton. Then there are other people that like what's going on, in behind Northport Elementary School in Port Elgin, the kind of development that's happening there. And all of that, I don't see those as weaknesses. I see them as strengths. And certainly, the growth at the south end of Port Elgin doesn't fit in really anywhere else in the community. So that's a definite commercial district or highway commercial district. So I just thought that, if we could spin that not so much as a weakness, but as this opportunity that there's different vibes. And one of those vibes is going to be attractive to somebody, whereas another one will be attractive for a different reason. But I thank you for the report. I had a question, though, that perhaps maybe is for you, Mayor Smith. If we are to receive this report tonight, the idea behind that is that we're just receiving it. We're not 100% agreeing with everything in there and 100% deciding to do all of it. And so all of the items in here, as you work through it with the Economic Development Committee, anything that rises up as a potential item that has some dollar impact would come back to council for a little more fulsome discussion. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Minaj.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and Aileen and Jessica. I really appreciate the overall high-level strategic plan thinking that went into this, and I think it's going to be a useful document going forward as well. One of the things that I'm trying to pick up on some of the lines here, and I think that some of that was said was, I wrote down anyway, we have unemployed people in this community that are highly educated, and there's a reason for that. And we know what the reason is. Maybe they were brought here by a significant other that are working at Bruce Power, but they didn't get employed. And is there an inventory of those people and what their education skills are? Why? Because maybe the next step, or one of the next steps, a bridge, is that I'll use a hypothetical. Rolls-Royce says, blending in everything that Dave was talking about and Diane was talking about, is Rolls-Royce is on the verge of wanting to build some kind of gas turbine repair shop or an education center and repair shop somewhere else other than where they currently locate. We've got them in an office here, but we haven't got them industrially here yet, and I think you're working on that. So I know this will be somewhat successful if we get that education component that Dave's been talking about, and we get something more than just the commercial and the retail and the service industry offshoot. I'm looking for a solid industrial offshoot, an industrial complex that speaks to the people that are in this community that are not just sitting idling, but they can't get the jobs they want locally. They came because somebody else got a very good job, and I've spoken to some of them, and they're working out of sorts. They're not in their fields. So robotic engineering and robotic tooling, these are all big talk things that are the future. What is the future? Bring it back and speak to Rolls-Royce and speak to SNC Lavalin and speak to BWXT and say, what aren't you doing? What could we do for you here now? Because we've got this inventory of people that you could tap into right away. That's where I hope you're going. Thank you.
Councillor Mike Myatt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Eileen, for your presentation. And I just had a few questions, a couple comments. The annual Economic Development Forum, I think, is a tremendous idea. That's happening in other areas around the province with a lot of success. So I look forward to seeing the day that comes to Saugeen Shores. I think that'd be a welcome addition.
And I hope you invite me.
In your critical actions, is that list in order of priority?
No, it's not. It's just the order that they showed up in as related to the goals and objectives.
One of the number one was amend the tourism service agreement, and I don't know what that means. Could you clarify for me what you mean when you say amend the tourism service agreement?
Absolutely. We would like to see some metrics on what services that you're receiving through that agreement, what your objectives for that tourism management and tourism marketing program are. Are they measures on the number of visitors? Are there measures on the number of visits you've got to your website? When you're doing promotional activities, do you know that they're being followed through on? Are there any measurements to understand that the money and the time that's being invested is translating into people that are coming into the community?
And have there been early discussions with our tourism provider who's providing now? Have you had those kinds of discussions?
I think that's a question for Jessica.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. We have had some preliminary discussions at EDAC on tourism and some reporting, and so that's on our agenda for tomorrow's meeting as well. But that recommendation, it's under Goal 1, Item number 8, review and amend tourism service agreement with the Chamber of Commerce to include specific performance measures. Consider the feasibility of delivering tourism services in-house as part of a full-time economic development manager. So that first sentence certainly has been discussed at EDAC to specify what those performance measures might be. And I've had a couple of conversations today around that. And to me, frankly, that's exciting. We can set some goals and work closely and strategically with tourism. So
discussions have been held with the Chamber then?
Yes.
Okay. You mentioned in your presentation about 47% number. And you talked about, were you implying that...
Commuting.
Pardon me?
That was commuting numbers.
Were you implying that 43% of the workforce is commuting in and out of Saugeen Shores? That they don't live here but they work here? Is that what you're saying?
I'm really good at numbers when they're right in front of me. Okay, so that was...
53%, I meant.
Slide number 10. And yes, 47% of the workers in Saugeen Shores are living and working in the same municipality. So that means that, yes, you're right, the other 53 are not. So that's a very large number.
It is a large number.
Yes.
And did you drill down at all in terms of affordable housing, why that number is so high? Has there been any research drilling down into looking at that number to trying to determine why that number is so high?
So that's not something we could do with this data. This is data that comes from Statistics Canada.
Okay.
So the Ys are not something that Statistics Canada would provide.
So you plucked that number out.
Yeah. But
Okay.
there is something. There are things you can do with that. We expect that that's as a result of having that huge employer just down the road.
Right.
And so that's why you've got that very large number. I would expect that you're part of the network that does the Employer One survey every year, and so that would certainly be something that you could speak with your Workforce Planning Board. We've recognized and we've identified them in several actions throughout the strategic plan as an important component, particularly when worker attraction, resident attraction is such an important piece of your strategy, and so that would definitely be something I would discuss with them.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
No further questions? Well, thank you very much, Eileen, and thank you for the work you put into the report. It'll be exciting to see how it unfolds with our committee and council.
Thank you. It was a pleasure working with Jessica and with the EDAC committee, and it's a very exciting time to be in Saugeen Shores for sure. And I wish you all the best with this.
I absolutely agree. I think we've got a great opportunity here, and Saugeen Shores has a number of advantages that other communities don't have. So I think it's good. We're in a great spot to take advantage and see some great things in our community. Thank you. So there is a recommendation, and the recommendation is that Council receive the Economic Development Strategic Plan as presented by Eileen Murray of Mellor Murray Consulting, Gaudet and Associates, 360 Bespoke Consulting. Any questions on this recommendation? All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Thank you. Thank you, Jessica. So the next item on our agenda then is, excuse me, communications, petitions for committee of the whole information. There's, I believe, about 7 items there. Vice Deputy Mayor Huber.
Thank you. Through you, a question that perhaps the Director of Community Services and Recreation could just comment on. In the waterfront minutes, there's some comments about the upcoming Parks and Waterfront bylaw. 2 questions. Do you have a sense of the timeline for when that might be at this table? And then the second question is, in the minutes there's a very specific comment related to including the waterfront in this and defining it as a park opens up some funding potential. I'm just curious to get a further comment on about that. Southampton, back in the day, the waterfront was an approved park, and that changed when amalgamation happens. So, I'm not against the idea, but I was just curious why that very specific comment is there about opens up funding opportunities. Thanks.
Potentially some funding opportunities through grants that permits for opportunities for parks, so if it's identified as a park. As far as it coming to this table, there's still a long process to go. It's gone to REACT Committee, and my understanding it's gone to Waterfront Advisory Committee twice now for feedback, and Frank, our Parks Manager who attended those meetings, is still accumulating those comments back. Once we go through that process, then we'll be taking it through the senior management process for their feedback as well. So there's still as quickly as we'd like it to go, sometimes it is not, and this is a long, drawn-out process.
Any questions? If not, that's the end of our agenda, and we'll take a motion to adjourn. Councillor Madison and Councillor Rich, all in favor? We'll take a 10-minute break.